Sylvia Marie Likens was born on the 3rd of January 1949, in Lebanon, Indiana, to Betty and Lester Likens. She had 2 sisters, Diana and Jenny, and 2 brothers, called Benny and Daniel. Her family struggled financially and would move frequently as their father tried to find work. Sylvia's parents would often travel with carnivals selling food from concession stands to make ends meet. Her sister Diana, who was the oldest sibling, later became estranged from the family and got married. Diana had started a family and had her own house. Benny and Daniel would often go to their grandparents whilst their parents worked away, but there would always be difficulties trying to find somewhere for Sylvia and Jenny to stay. Jenny walked with a limp due to polio and had to wear a steel brace on one of her legs. Sylvia was very close to her sister Jenny and very protective. Sylvia was described by those that knew her as a kind and caring person who made friends easily. She was a pretty girl with freckles and lovely long wavy brown hair. She would always smile with her mouth closed due to a missing tooth that was knocked out during an accident playing a game with one of her brothers. Sylvia always seemed to have a good work ethic about her. She was always doing little jobs, such as ironing for people, sweeping up leaves from a neighbor's lawn, or collecting empty Coca-Cola bottles for money. In July of 1965, Sylvia's mother Betty was suffering financial problems. She and Sylvia's father Lester had recently separated, and Betty turned to shoplifting to support her children. Betty ended up getting caught and was put in jail, which left Sylvia and Jenny to fend for themselves with their brothers living at their grandparents' house, and they couldn't go to their oldest sister Diana's house due to the family estrangement. Lester Likens, who was living elsewhere at that time, had found out about his estranged wife's incarceration and went to visit her. They discussed their financial problems and giving their marriage another chance. They decided that their best chance of making any money was to carry on working together traveling with the carnivals. Their only problem was finding somewhere for the girls to stay so they could continue attending school. The boys were settled at their grandparents' house, so Lester returned to the family home to find Sylvia and Jenny and see what arrangements could be made for them if they were to return to the carnivals. When he got to the house, the girls were missing, and he began to worry. Lester asked around the neighborhood to see if the girls had been seen, and a local resident explained that they were staying at Paula Baniszewski's house. Paula was the daughter of Gertrude Baniszewski. Gertrude Baniszewski was formerly Gertrude van Fossen, and she was born in 1929 and was the 3rd of 6 children. Not much is known about her childhood except that she was extremely close to her father but didn't bond so well with her mother. At the age of 11, Gertrude's beloved father had a heart attack and died in front of her. Instead of her father's death bringing Gertrude and her mother together in their grief, they further drifted apart, and arguments between the pair became a regular occurrence. Gertrude married her 18-year-old boyfriend, John Baniszewski, and started a family. She would go on to have 4 children with him. The marriage was quite violent, with Gertrude often starved of affection, and during discussions, her husband would hit her if she dared to argue or disagree with him. John Baniszewski was a police officer who upheld the law in public but didn't seem to do so behind closed doors with his wife. Gertrude had 7 children and had suffered 6 miscarriages with a long line of failed relationships. By the time 1965 rolled around, Gertrude's years of hardship, bad relationships, and financial struggles were starting to take a toll on her health and appearance. She had lost a lot of weight and struggled with asthma as well as other ailments. Due to lack of proper nutrition, she had a receding hairline and her face looked tired and drawn. She also failed to wash regularly or keep her house clean, and was a heavy chain smoker. Gertrude and her children, Paula, 17, Stephanie, 15, John, 12, Marie, 11, Shirley, 10, James, 8, and Dennis Jr., 1, lived in a big house at the corner of East New York and Denny Street. The address was 3850 East New York Street in Indianapolis, USA. The rent was $55 per month. There's no disputing that Gertrude and her children had suffered a tough past and times were hard, but what was to take place in that house on East New York Street was way beyond any nightmare anyone could have imagined. When Lester arrived at the Baniszewski house that evening, he was exhausted but relieved to see the girls and that they had gotten on well with Gertrude. He could see that Gertrude had a lot of children to look after, and that she had a young but tired look about her. As it was getting late, Gertrude offered Lester her sofa for the night, and he accepted. The next morning, Lester and Gertrude spoke over coffee about his and Betty's plans to get some money together working in the carnivals, but they did not know what to do about the girls. After a discussion, Gertrude offered to take the girls in for $20 a week and they could still attend school. The girls seemed to be happy with this idea and were looking forward to spending more time with their friends without the constant moving around. Lester said goodbye to the girls and reassured them that he and Betty would be visiting soon, and told them both to behave. He told Gertrude to keep the girls on the straight and narrow as their mother had always let them do what they wanted. Despite staying in the house overnight and entrusting his daughters to Gertrude's care, a woman he had barely known, Lester failed to check out the house or notice the thick layers of mold and dirt around the place. There was also a lack of plates or utensils, and no stove or microwave. The only food that was on offer was bread, crackers, and soup. Despite this, the first couple of weeks went well for the girls. They attended school and church with the Baniszewski family and went to the park with the children. All seemed well. Unfortunately, things did not continue this way, and things took a sudden turn for the worse when the $20 payment from Lester didn't come through on the day that Gertrude was expecting it. She flew into a rage and grabbed Sylvia and Jenny. She dragged the girls into a bedroom where she pulled down their pants and pushed them face first onto the bed. She yelled, "I took care of you two bitches for 2 weeks for nothing," and proceeded to spank the girls very hard on the buttocks. The payment arrived the next day, and nothing more was said about it. There was no apology to the girls from Gertrude, and when their parents came to visit them a short while later, nothing was said about the incident. A short time after this, the girls decided to go looking around the neighborhood for empty Coca-Cola bottles to get some money for candy. When they brought the candy back to share out with the other children, Gertrude flew into another rage and accused them of stealing. Sylvia tried to explain, but Gertrude dragged her into a bedroom and hit her continuously on the backside with a paddle. It was also at this point things started to change between Gertrude's daughter Paula and Sylvia. Paula seemed to have a jealousy towards Sylvia, and when the children had come back from a dinner at their local church, Paula and some of the children told Gertrude that they had seen Sylvia stuff her face with lots of food. Gertrude confronted Sylvia and told her that she was angry that she would do something that could ruin her appearance, and sat her down at the kitchen table. The children had a collection of spices, mustard, ketchup, and salt, and Gertrude made them pass around a hot dog whilst piling it up with condiments. Once the hot dog reached Sylvia, it was piled high with various sauces. She was forced to eat it. Sylvia vomited, and Gertrude then forced her to eat her own vomit whilst the children stood around taunting her. Betty and Lester visited the girls at the house again, and nothing was said about this incident either. After they had left, Gertrude taunted Sylvia, saying, "What are you going to do now that they're gone?" Jenny had to stand by and watch as her sister was bullied and beaten, harassed and starved, with threats that if she tried to intervene or tell anyone, that she'd be next. There would be times where she'd be forced to join in, and was threatened that if she didn't, she'd end up in the basement. Jenny later said that when she was forced to hit Sylvia, she would use her weak arm as to try and not hurt her as much. Gertrude was ready to pounce on any little thing that Sylvia said or did that she thought was wrong. She was looking for excuses to harm Sylvia, and when she overheard a conversation about Sylvia once having a boyfriend who she made out with, Gertrude saw red. Flying into another rage, she confronted Sylvia, questioned her about this boy, and called her a prostitute, before telling all the children that Sylvia is pregnant because she let a boy touch her vagina. Gertrude threw Sylvia on the floor and began kicking her really hard in the vaginal area repeatedly. When she grew tired, as she often did with her asthma, Paula would take over. Sylvia, thinking the beating was over, tried to sit on a chair. Paula threw her off and screamed, "You're not fit to sit in the chair." From that moment on, Sylvia was only allowed to sit down on a chair if she was given permission to. Encouraged by their mother, the children would beat Sylvia, hitting her with objects, pulling her hair, punching her, and throwing her down the stairs. They treated her like a human rag doll. Surprisingly, Sylvia and Jenny still attended school with all of this going on, and Gertrude had such a hold over them psychologically that they dare not tell a soul what was going on at the Baniszewski house. Gertrude was a master manipulator, and knew how to play mind games with people and play on people's emotions to her own advantage. The day after Gertrude attacked Sylvia by kicking her in the crotch repeatedly, she attended school as normal whilst trying to put up a facade that all was okay. There was a lot of anger there understandably, and the girls wanted some sort of revenge. For some reason they thought it would be a good idea to tell people in the school that Paula and Stephanie were prostitutes. Word quickly got around and Stephanie's boyfriend, Coy Hubbard, went to the Baniszewski house to tell Gertrude what was happening. When Sylvia appeared, she was confronted by Coy and beaten. Gertrude then gave him permission to come round to the house whenever he felt like it, to beat Sylvia up, which he did. Using her master manipulative skills, Gertrude told Sylvia's best friend, Anna Sisko, that Sylvia had been telling all the boys at school that Anna's mother was a whore. Anna, believing this to be true, followed Gertrude to where Sylvia was and was encouraged to beat Sylvia up. Gertrude then told another friend of Sylvia's called Judy Duke, that Sylvia had been spreading rumors around about her mother too. Gertrude encouraged the two girls to fight whilst Jenny was stood in shock not knowing what to do. Gertrude ordered Jenny to punch her sister in the face. When Jenny refused, Gertrude began smacking her across the face until she finally agreed to punch her sister. In August 1965, a middle-aged couple named Phyllis and Raymond Vermillion bought the house next door to the Baniszewski family. The couple had 2 children and were looking for a babysitter whilst Phyllis attended work. The couple noticed that Gertrude was a single mother who had several children to care for. They thought Gertrude always seemed polite and friendly, so in an effort to get to know Gertrude and her family a little bit more, they invited them all round to their barbecue. Whilst Phyllis and Gertrude were talking, she noticed a thin, shy girl with a black eye in the background. Noticing Phyllis looking at Sylvia, Paula walked up to Sylvia with a cup of hot water and threw it in her face. She also proudly told Phyllis that she was the one who was responsible for Sylvia's black eye. Phyllis was shocked and told her husband that maybe it wasn't such a good idea for Gertrude to babysit their children. The couple didn't report the incident to the authorities. A couple of months later, Phyllis went over to visit Gertrude to borrow something, and saw Sylvia walking around in a daze with swollen lips and a black eye which was swollen shut. As Phyllis sat waiting for Gertrude, Paula again told Phyllis that she was responsible for Sylvia's injuries and proceeded to beat her with a belt. Phyllis again failed to report the incident to authorities. She later claimed that she was scared. Paula once punched Sylvia so hard on her jaw that she broke her wrist. She had to wear a cast, but this didn't stop her using the cast to beat Sylvia. A little while after this, Sylvia told Gertrude that she needed a sweatsuit for school. Gertrude told her that she could not afford one. There are varied accounts of what happened next from various sources. Some people believe that Sylvia stole a sweatsuit from school, and others believe that she was falsely accused by Gertrude as another excuse to beat her. Whatever the case with the sweatsuit, Gertrude accused her of theft and threw her to the ground, where she repeatedly kicked her in the vaginal area once more. To cure Sylvia of her sticky fingers, Gertrude burned the tips of each of her fingers with a cigarette. Afterwards, she made Sylvia bend over whilst she beat her with a leather police belt which was left over from her ex-husband. Gertrude told the smokers of the household to burn their cigarettes into Sylvia's body to teach her a lesson not to steal. Some time later, Sylvia tried to find some empty Coca-Cola bottles around the neighborhood as a way of making some money. One wonders if she was desperate for some proper food, as the eating situation at the Baniszewski household was so bad. Sylvia returned to the house and Gertrude found the money and accused her of being a prostitute. Gertrude dragged Sylvia into the living room, where she forced Sylvia to strip naked in front of her sons and several neighborhood boys. She told her that if she didn't do as she ordered, she would beat her sister Jenny. Once she was fully naked, Gertrude forced her to perform sexual acts with the Coca-Cola bottle in front of the boys. Due to this incident, Sylvia developed bladder problems and accidentally wet the bed at night. Gertrude decided that she was no longer fit to live with humans and locked her in the cold and filthy basement. As Sylvia wasn't allowed to go upstairs to the toilet, and there was no bucket, she had no choice but to urinate and defecate on the floor. When Gertrude saw this, she began a harsh bathing regime to cleanse Sylvia, who she nicknamed Dirty Girl. This harsh regime consisted of a bath full of boiling hot water, tying Sylvia's wrists and ankles together, and dunking her in and out of the water till her skin was red raw. Once her skin was throbbing and peeling from the hot water, Paula would rub handfuls of salt all over her naked body. These hellish baths would sometimes take place several times a day, depending on what kind of mood Gertrude was in. There were times when Sylvia would faint from the hot temperatures of the baths, and Gertrude would repeatedly bang her head against the bath in an attempt to revive her. Gertrude became inappropriately friendly with a neighborhood boy called Ricky Hobbs, who was 14 years old and seemed to hang on her every word. Up until this point, Ricky was a well-behaved boy, an honor student who came from a respectable family and had never been in trouble with the law. Under Gertrude's manipulation, he would help torture Sylvia. The Baniszewski family turned Sylvia into a money-making opportunity. Kids from the neighborhood would pay money to come and see her naked, or to punch her and kick her. By this time, Gertrude had forbidden Sylvia from going to school or to be allowed out of the house. Sylvia was constantly naked and was hardly ever fed. If she were allowed anything, it was mostly some dry crackers or a bowl of soup which she would have to eat with her fingers. The children would often tease her with the soup by pushing the bowl in front of her, and then taking it away. Often Gertrude and her 12-year-old son John Jr. would force Sylvia to clean the basement by allowing her to eat her own feces. She was given a container to collect her urine, which she would be forced to drink for John Jr. and Gertrude's amusement. There were opportunities for intervention, however they all failed. Sylvia and Jenny had run into their elder sister, Diana, a couple of times over the previous weeks when they were in the park, and they tried to tell her what had been going on, but Diana thought that they were making up stories as an excuse to try and move in with her. A local reverend had been visiting members of his congregation, and he visited the Baniszewski house. The reverend never saw Sylvia, but Gertrude told him that she was a prostitute, and that she was having difficulties with her. When Jenny appeared in the room and was asked about her sister, Jenny lied and told the reverend that her sister told lies, as Gertrude was stood by keeping an eye on what she was saying. He returned a couple of weeks later and a similar situation happened with Gertrude complaining about Sylvia and saying a prayer. The father of one of the neighborhood boys had called the Arsenal Technical High School to anonymously report that there was a girl with sores all over her body at the Baniszewski house. As Sylvia had not been attending school, a nurse was sent out to investigate the situation. Gertrude told the nurse that Sylvia had been up to no good, and she had thrown her out of the house. The nurse filed a report that no more visits were required at Gertrude's house. One of the neighborhood kids who'd been to the house and seen Sylvia told her mother that she saw a girl being beaten up. Her mother replied in a non-caring way that that's what happens when someone is being punished. At the beginning of October, Diana tried to visit her sisters and was told by Gertrude to stay away. She claimed that Betty and Lester had specifically told her to keep the girls away from Diana. A short time after this, Diana ran into Jenny and tried to talk to her and find out what was really going on. Jenny told her that she wasn't allowed to speak to her and ran away. Due to these failings, the torment continued. Gertrude told Sylvia that she could sleep upstairs again if she could learn to control her bladder during the night. She instructed John, Coy and Stephanie to tie her up, so that she couldn't get up to go to the bathroom during the night. Gertrude said to Sylvia, "You can't go to the bathroom until you've learned not to wet the bed." Sylvia wet the bed during that night, and the next morning she was dragged into the living room and forced to perform a strip-tease in front of Gertrude's sons and some of the neighborhood kids again. She was again forced to perform sexual acts with a Coca-Cola bottle. During this degradation, Stephanie walked into the room and started slapping Sylvia across the face. Sylvia was tied down and gagged, and Hobbs was told to tattoo her. Gertrude heated a sewing needle until it was glowing orange, and carved the letter I, and part of an M into Sylvia's stomach. She ordered Ricky Hobbs to finish the job. He started carving but stopped and asked Gertrude how to spell prostitute, so she wrote it down for him, and he continued. Sylvia now had, "I'm a prostitute, and proud of it," carved into her stomach. Ricky, Paula and 10-year-old Shirley decided they wanted to put something on Sylvia's chest. They decided to go with an S. Ricky carved the first half and told Jenny to do the rest, to which she refused, so Shirley took over. Shirley carved the wrong way and the S ended up looking like a 3. Gertrude returned and began to mock Sylvia in front of her little gang of children, Randy Lepper, Shirley and Ricky, saying, "What are you going to do now, Sylvia? You can't get married now. You can't undress in front of anyone. What are you going to do now?" Sylvia responded to Gertrude and said, "I guess there's nothing I can do. It's on there now." Her sister Jenny had to watch it all. When they all left, Sylvia was left alone in the basement where she was kept for most of the time. Her sister visited her during the night, and on this occasion, she told Jenny, "Jenny, I know you don't want me to die, but I am going to die, I can tell." Shortly after this, Gertrude brought Sylvia upstairs and allowed her to sleep in one of the bedrooms. Stephanie and Gertrude gave her a warm bath rather than the usual boiling hot one. After this, Gertrude told her that she was going to write a letter to her parents. As Gertrude dictated, Sylvia wrote down what she said onto the piece of paper. The letter read, "To Mr. and Mrs. Likens. I went off with a gang of boys in the middle of the night, and they said that they would pay me if I gave them something. So, I got in the car, and they all got what they wanted, and when they were finished, they beat me up and left sores on my face and all over my body. And they also put on my stomach. I am a prostitute, and proud of it. I have done just about everything I could to make Gertie mad and cost Gertie more than she's got. I tore up a new mattress and peed on it. I have also cost Gertie doctor bills that she really can't pay and made Gertie a nervous wreck and all her kids." For some reason, Gertrude didn't ask Sylvia to sign the letter, but it was clear that she had a feeling that Sylvia was coming to the end of her life, as she was growing even more weaker by the day. Sylvia overheard Gertrude making plans to have her dumped in a waste lot to be left to die. She ordered John Jr. and Jenny to carry this out. Sylvia panicked and tried to escape, but being too weak and not having much energy, Gertrude got a hold of her. Sylvia was dragged to the kitchen where she was offered a piece of dry toast. When she refused and said that she couldn't swallow properly, Gertrude took down a curtain rod and beat her on the mouth with it. John Jr. was ordered to take her back down to the basement and tie her up. A short while later, Gertrude came down to the basement with some crackers. Sylvia refused them and said, "Give it to the dog, it's hungrier than I am." Gertrude then punched Sylvia several times in the stomach before leaving the basement. On the 24th of October, Gertrude and John Jr. both beat Sylvia. Gertrude threw a chair at her, but it broke against the wall, so she tried to hit her with the paddle but ended up hitting herself in the face. Coy Hubbard then stepped in and beat Sylvia unconscious with a broomstick. During the night up until 3 a.m., the neighbors later told the police that they heard a scraping sound coming from the Baniszewski basement. It was Sylvia using the scoop end of a shovel in an attempt to attract attention from the neighbors. None of the neighbors contacted the police. On the 26th of October, Sylvia was given a final non-torturous bath by Ricky and Stephanie. They noticed that she wasn't breathing in the bathtub. Stephanie attempted to give her CPR, but Sylvia was gone. Gertrude told her children to strip Sylvia naked and ordered Ricky to go to the payphone and call the police. When the police arrived, Gertrude came up with a ridiculous story that Sylvia had run away as a prostitute, and that she had shown up on her doorstep unexpectedly, half naked, with a note claiming that a gang of boys had attacked her. She said that she'd been doctoring Sylvia for about an hour when she passed away. In the middle of all of this, Paula, who was holding a Bible, announced to everyone that Sylvia's death was meant to happen and told Jenny, "If you want to live with us, Jenny, we'll treat you like our own sister." The police were not stupid. They could see that they were not dealing with people who were of sound body and mind, and the poor girl's body was so emaciated and covered in sores, bruises, and burns, that they could tell that her injuries had come about over a period of time and not the result of a recent attack as Gertrude had claimed. They looked at the note, and during the commotion, Jenny whispered to one of the police officers, "Get me out of here and I'll tell you everything." The police didn't waste any time and arrested Gertrude, Paula, Stephanie, John, Ricky, and Coy. The neighborhood children who were present at the time, Mike Monroe, Randy Lepper, Judy Duke and Anna Cisco were also arrested for injury to a person. Gertrude, her children, Ricky and Coy were held without bail pending their trials. Charges against Mike Monroe, Randy Lepper, Judy Duke and Anna Cisco were dismissed. Stephanie Baniszewski's lawyer got her a separate trial, and before it was able to begin, the district attorney dropped the murder charges. An autopsy performed on Sylvia Likens' body concluded that she had suffered over 150 separate wounds across her entire body. Her injuries included burns and bruises, muscle and nerve damage. Her vaginal cavity was almost swollen shut. A further examination determined that Sylvia was still a virgin at the time of her death. All her fingernails were broken backwards, layers of her skin were peeling off, and she had bitten through her lips, partially severing sections of them from her face. Her official cause of death was severe swelling and hemorrhaging of the brain, combined with shock and malnutrition. The trial began in May of 1966. The prosecution sought the death penalty for everyone involved, including John and Ricky, who were 13 and 14 at the time. Paula went into labor during the trial and gave birth to a girl whom she named Gertrude, after her mother. There were 4 different attorneys involved, one for Gertrude, one for Paula, one for John and Coy, and one for Ricky, even though they were all being tried together. Each attorney tried to pass on the blame to the others involved to get their client acquitted or a lesser sentence. Gertrude and her attorney tried to pull the wool over people's eyes by portraying her as a weak, mentally ill person, and placed all the blame onto the children. The children placed the blame on Gertrude and the other children involved. Some of the most damaging testimony came from Gertrude herself, when she repeated her paranoid ramblings about Sylvia being a prostitute, who had been seeing middle-aged married men and that she caused trouble in her house. To corroborate Gertrude's story, her 11-year-old daughter Marie was called to the stand. At first the child repeated everything her mother had told her to say, but under cross-examination, she crumbled and told the truth about everything that happened. Gertrude was found guilty of first-degree murder, but she did not receive the death penalty. She was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Paula was convicted of second-degree murder. She appealed and was granted a new trial, but before it began, she struck a plea bargain and pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter. She served just 3 years of her sentence and was paroled, despite trying to previously escape prison. John, Coy, and Ricky were each convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 18 months in a juvenile detention facility. By the time Ricky was released, the reality of what he had done played heavily on his mind and he suffered a nervous breakdown. He became a heavy chain smoker and died of lung cancer at 21 years old. Gertrude appealed and was also given a new trial. She was found guilty again but sentenced to 18 years to life. She became a model prisoner behind bars and worked in a sewing shop. She became a shoulder to cry on to younger female prisoners, and by the time she came up for parole in 1985, her nickname in prison was Mom. Gertrude Nadine Baniszewski had various nicknames over the years, but the one that seems to have stuck the most is the Torture Mother. Some people describe her as the most evil woman ever. Despite efforts to keep her in prison, Gertrude walked out of the prison gates on the 4th of December 1985. She changed her name to Nadine Van Fossen. Her taste of freedom was to be short-lived as she died in 1990 of lung cancer. Sylvia's funeral took place in November of 1965 and was attended by over 100 people. The service took place at Russell and Hitch Funeral Home in Lebanon. She was buried in Oak Hill Cemetery. Her headstone was inscribed in June 2001, with the words, "Our darling daughter." A memorial was formally dedicated to Sylvia, which was attended by several hundreds of people, including Sylvia's family. If you enjoyed this video, then don't forget to like and subscribe for more content just like this, and hit the bell icon, and we'll let you know every time we upload a new video. Thanks for watching.